So now she leaves, and while she's gone during the 7 years, basically, some other people came in and took over her land. Hey, it's an empty house. Pretty nice house, evidently. We're going to take it over. And so she comes back after the 7 years, and her land has been taken over. Her possessions have been taken over that they left there. So she goes to the king to get justice because this isn't right. This isn't right. She's an honorable, righteous woman. And here she loses all her stuff because she followed Elisha, the man of God, in doing what he said to do. Yeah. And so she comes back and says, that's it, I'm going to the king. Get these homesteaders out of my house. And she goes, and just by coincidence, Gehazi's there. Now, Gehazi, we know from another story from the Old Testament. Gehazi is the one, if you remember when Naaman the Syrian had a skin disease, and he was the head of the army of Ben-Hadad in Syria. And they had captured some people from Israel, and one of the girls that they captured, who was now a servant in Naaman's house, said to her mistress, oh, if only Naaman, my master, could go see the man of God down in Israel, he could heal him. And so Naaman went down, and he tried to find Elisha. And Elisha wouldn't even come out to see him. This is the number 2 guy in Syria. And Elisha sends one of his servants out and goes, okay, you want to be healed? Go dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan. Naaman goes, what? I expected you were going to come out here and wave your arms around and jump up and down and swing something around. And you just tell me to go wash in this muddy stream called the Jordan? What's up with that? There are better rivers up in Syria. Forget that. He gets on his horse and takes off. And his servant, not Elisha's servant, but Naaman's servant, stops him on the way and says, hey, look, you know what? If he had told you to do some amazing feat, you'd have done it, right? Here he told you to do something that's actually pretty simple. Give it a try. So Naaman does. He goes and dips himself 7 times, and poof, the leprosy is healed. He's amazed. He goes back and humbles himself before the man of God. He says, look, I brought donkeys and donkeys laden with treasure and gold and silver. Let me give you something. Elisha says, don't want anything. Gehazi had heard this. So Naaman takes off. Gehazi goes, maybe my master doesn't want anything, but I could use a few bucks. So he chases after him. Chases after Naaman, gets him, and says, hey, Naaman sent me, Elisha sent me, Naaman, and there are a couple people coming, and we need to give them some money. Elisha still doesn't want it, but some other guys are coming by, and they need some money and some clothes. Could you handle that? Naaman goes, well, yeah, sure, take all this. Gehazi goes back to Elisha, and Elisha says, what are you be doing? Oh, nothing. Don't you think I saw you and the Lord saw what you were doing? So the skin disease that Naaman had will be upon you in judgment. And it says he had that skin disease from that moment on. So now we find him in the company of the king. And I kind of scratch my head and I go, what's he doing there? And this king didn't like Elisha. Remember, this is the king that had problems with Elisha. Elisha had told him one time, hey, I'm giving you this information only because the Lord's telling me to, not because of your righteousness. He at one point said when the Syrians were coming after him, that's it. If Elisha's head isn't off his shoulders today, may God do more so to me. So these guys weren't buddies. So here's Gehazi, who had been cursed through Elisha, judged because of his unrighteousness. And here he is with the king. And the king's going, tell me all the great things that Elisha has done. I really wonder about this. And I don't have a good answer for you. If I've led you on to believe that I'm going to give you the answer to that, sorry. I don't know. But there he is. It could be, some believe, that Elisha basically fired him. And Gehazi went and started to serve the king. And the king at some point realized who he was and goes, well, tell me all this stuff. Tell me about this guy, Elisha. I hear a lot about him. You were one of his closest associates. What really went on there? Kind of like people come over to our house sometimes, and I watch them. And I watch the way they look around, and I watch the way they look in the area where we keep all of our videos. They're kind of looking, what's Pastor Kevin really watch? What kind of books does he have on his bookshelf? What kind of pictures do they have around? And I know that's just natural. Because here I am, I stand up here and I teach the scriptures every Sunday. And I try to deflate the impression that you might have that I'm some righteous, holy guy. But rather that I'm just a sinner saved by grace just like you. But the appointment that God has given, the calling that God has given to me is to pastor and to teach. But that doesn't mean, start worshiping me or anything. But as human beings, we kind of naturally do that. And there's this whole VH1 thing going on. The real story. What's the real story about Pastor Kevin? What's he really do on Saturday night? I'm not telling. No, I'm sorry. I couldn't resist that. Actually, yesterday, we went up to Pymatuning. Oh my gosh, is that beautiful. I haven't been up there since I was a kid. And I mean, we went and, anybody ever been up to Pymatuning? You know what's there with all the carp that crawl all over each other to get at the bread, and we went there. But then we went over to the Conservancy. It's I think it's a federal conservancy. It's just north of where the feeding the fish are, and it's this little spot, and it's just a beautiful spot. And we laid there and had a picnic on the ground there and saw bluebirds. I've never seen a bluebird before in my life, but there were bluebirds there, and that's what Pastor Kevin does. It's not too exciting. But here's the king going, so what goes on really there? And Gehazi is telling him good things and saying, man, he raised a kid from the dead. And then he turns around and goes, and there he is. And there's the mom. Now, don't you find it kind of coincidental that there they all are in front of the king at the same time? It has nothing to do with coincidence. It has to do with justice. And God brings about justice, and sometimes it is immediate. Sometimes, underline that, put it in bold, little quotes around it. Sometimes it is immediate. And here it was. This woman was a righteous woman and had been wronged. She comes before the king, and God had already arranged it. Don't you love that? The impression is she hadn't even gotten the opportunity to go, hey, king, let me tell you my story. But rather, because Gehazi's telling the stories about Elisha, and he's looking around and goes, hey, and if you don't believe me, there's the woman and there's the kid. And that's the point at which time that they come up, and it says, she spoke to the king. Wow, that's pretty cool. That means that God establishes justice and determines the timing when justice is to be established. If you should have to appear before a court, if you should have to appear before some council where you're seeking justice, and you want to plead your case, as a believer and follower of Jesus Christ, you need to know that God has gone there before you. But wait a minute, Pastor. It didn't go well. Well, that meant if true justice wasn't served at that point, that doesn't mean that God is not just or has forgotten about you or was too busy with much bigger things over in the other part of the world and just kind of forgot that it was a 10 o'clock court appointment. Oh, missed it. No. It means that God's timing is better, and now is not the time, because he is going to appoint things that are going to bring about greater and better things in your life and through your life in this situation.